So, so you can drag me off the stage. This has been an amazing day, full of incredible information that ranges from the local to the global to the national to all around. But what I'm going to do now, I think, is to try to take you on the journey that I sort of went on myself when asked to give the plenary talk at the International Botanical Congress in Madrid this summer. And I thought to myself, some people often ask you, why botany? And in this room, we would all say, well, what an idiotic question. But actually, it's a very good question, and we should all be able to answer that question. Why botany? And also, why botany now? Why is botany now more important than it ever has been before? So I hope to be able to give you some tiny little tips about how to answer that question. So we all know that we live on a blue and green planet, and I'm going to focus on the green bits because we're all botanists here, aren't we? And we'd like this planet to remain blue and green, would we not? And we often think about plants and their importance in our lives in thinking about the things they give us. And one of the things that plants give us is the air that we breathe. And this is a map of nature's primary productivity throughout the year. And you can see that this is largely focused in the tropics, is it not? And that's maybe what we would expect, because that's where evergreen forests are. But think about what happens in the forests here in the Northern Hemisphere and what's happening to us right now. If you think about it in that way, you can look at the planet that breathes, and it's because of plants that our planet is breathing. And I would call this nature's heartbeat. This is the heartbeat of the earth, is what plants do for us through primary productivity. Now, oops, that was exciting. So that then puts paid the idea that actually it's the tropics and the evergreen tropical forests which are important in a global scale for plants. It means that the plants that occur here in Britain, in the North Temperate Zone, are equally important for that major kind of activity that major thing that plants provide us, which is the air that we breathe and the reason that we're able to exist on the earth. So we know that plants have sustained civilizations. These are Mayan ruins in Mexico. They also provide most of us with the food that we eat. They actually provide all of us with the food that we eat really every day. It's just that very few of us actually harvest it directly from the plant, except occasionally. And they also provide us with beauty in our everyday lives. You know, plants, oftentimes we think of biodiversity as a commodity which provides us with things that we use. But actually biodiversity and botany in particular, plants in particular, provide us with beauty in our lives, which is something that we need as humans. That's something that we need. And they also are the fabric for ecosystems, which we talked about. Several of the previous speakers today have talked about arthropod diversity and about diversity within habitats. And plants are the framework for those habitats and ecosystems. But we live in a world which is increasingly globalized, and we've talked a lot, and one of the great strengths of BSBI, I think, in my experience with BSBI, which is not very long, mind you, is in the concentration on the local and the real love of the local area and the local knowledge and the local wonderfulness that all gets transmitted through the society. But we live in a world which is extremely global. And we're often, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about two of the kind of global frameworks which framework on biodiversity. And one of these is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was done at not the Conference of the Parties of the Biodiversity Convention that happened this year, but the one before. And this has a vision and a mission. But one of the things that I just want us to think about is this purple circle here, which is about nature protected and restored, nature's contributions to people's valued and maintained, benefits equitably shared, and resources and capacity secured. And you get there by reducing threats, meeting needs, and having tools and solutions. And let's just keep that biodiversity framework in mind as we go through and come to the end, and you'll see how that is something that BSBI is completely cued into, whether or not we know it or not. Is we as a society are actually implementing through our strategy the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This is a word cloud from a paper which came out in 2023 in the New Phytologist, which was called the 100 Most Important Questions in Plant Biology 10 years on. So it was a paper that people had done 20 years ago and now 10 years ago, and now it was done again 10 years later. And I'm just going to focus, most of it is about food and climate and change and interactivity and security, because this is largely agriculturally focused. But I'm going to focus on 3 of these word clouds, which I think almost stand aside from the main word cloud, but I think are really, really important for us to think about in answering that question about why botany and why now. And these also link up to the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, I should just say what those are, because I've forgotten. It's about community, so thinking about communities and sustainability, thinking about natural environments and supporting natural environments, and thinking about wild diversity, utilization, and sustainability. So another one of these global frameworks, which overarches a lot of the work that's done in institutions like this, and also in research in general, are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 of these. And I saw an amazing talk at the Global Botanical Gardens Congress, in which this student from the University of Dundee did an incredible study looking at how botanical gardens actually contributed to all of these Sustainable Development Goals, because we often just focus on this one, which is life on land. You know, that's the easy peasy one. Yep, plants, life on land, that's easy. But what I want to do is take those Sustainable Development Goals and think about those three clusters in the word clouds, and think about 3 of these Sustainable Development Goals and why botany and why now contributes to those. And the first of these is cultivation. And this is about, cultivation is about agriculture, is it not? And that is about solutions from nature. One of the things that's central to our science strategy here at the Natural History Museum is to think about solutions from nature and solutions for nature. It's not just about extracting from nature, it's about also providing those solutions for nature so that it can persist into the future. So cultivation is in a way about solutions from nature. Conservation is solutions for nature. And then the last of these, and I think the most important one, is collaboration, is to partnerships to maintain those Sustainable Development Goals. So I call it the 3 C's. So cultivation, we often think of agriculture, and it's true, and this is in the United States, in the Midwest, but it's true here too. Mega agriculture is a monoculture industry. But the crops that we grow in these areas actually come from wild plants. These crops are often thought of as being separate entities entirely, but they actually have their roots in wild biodiversity. And wild biodiversity is often thought of as being something that's far away. The origins of corn are in Mexico. The origins of beans are in Mexico. But we also in Britain have crop wild relatives, which are incredibly important. Our local Brassicaceae are the crop wild relatives for all of that wonderful cancer-beating Brassicaceae that we eat. But looking at cultivation as solutions from nature also requires us to think about what we need to think about in terms of agriculture. And potatoes come to us from Peru. And potatoes are a very interesting crop. We depend on potatoes a lot here in Britain and in Ireland. And potatoes are a vegetatively reproduced crop, and they're a tetraploid, which means that there's a huge amount of retained negative mutation. So I've been working, and this is the only Solanaceae thing I'll put in. I've been working with scientists in China and who've been looking at breeding better potatoes, thinking about how we can create better potatoes, because there's this historical accumulation of deleterious mutations, which means that generation after generation, the crop becomes weaker and weaker and less able to resist disease. So what we did is something called genomic evolutionary rate profiling, very fancy pants genetics, that actually what it needed, though, to make it relevant was it needed taxonomy. It needed us to know what the species were that were related to potatoes, and it needed us to know how they were related. And that's botanical research. That is botany. This project to develop a new kind of potato that will allow us to breed them better to resist disease entirely depends upon the basic knowledge that botanical research brings. And we mustn't ever forget that famine and crop failure is not only in the developing world. This is the monument to the potato famine in Dublin, which killed millions and millions of people. So this is something that's really important. This is not something that just occurs far away. It can occur very, very close to home. So now moving to conservation. We often think about conservation, as the conservation of individual species, and the fact that we describe new species all the time is quite exciting. This is a new one that was described by a colleague of mine from Brazil. But actually, as we've heard today through many of the wonderful talks, Micheline's wonderful talks about the drying up lakes, it's also about habitat. It's about thinking about habitat as opposed to individual species. It's about thinking about plants and how they do their daily lives, because plants have daily lives, just like we do. Plants have daily lives, and how they do their daily lives with all of their friends is really, really important. And I did put something else on it. And so thinking about conservation also requires botanical research. It also requires research into what things are and how they're related. And a project I've been involved in for many, many years is to kind of monograph the entire genus Solanum, which there aren't very many in Britain. There are 1,267 species now of Solanum worldwide, and we're trying to get on with it. And the reason that it's important to know these things is that we need to know about functional traits, because this is what's going to enable us to decide priorities for conservation. And functional traits come from not only knowing the species, but also knowing the phylogeny and being able to use modeling techniques to look at that. But I want to last look at the thing that I think is the most important, which is collaboration. And we collaborate in the field, in far-flung places. We also collaborate in the field closer to home. This is my very first New Year plant hunt, which was very, very fun. And communities come together to do things, and botanical researchers are particularly good at coming together. This is the plant and algal tree of life. I put fungal in there, that's wrong. And this was led by botanists at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and relied almost completely upon herbarium specimens to get this phylogeny, which is every single genus. It's 61% of genera across all of flowering plants. And it's already generating new hypotheses about things. World Flora Online is another huge globally collaborative project which pulls together a lot of people to do a lot of work to understand plants on a global scale better. And in all of these, herbaria, as Stuart has said, are really, really important. Herbaria are the key to all of this. But thinking about plants again, and plants, even though it doesn't look like there's not very many in this picture, they're everywhere. And plants are really important on a global scale. If you look at Earth's biomass in carbon, 80% of it is plants. 450 gigatons of carbon are plants. The animals are that tiny little gray triangle in the bottom. If you blow up animals, we humans are that tiny little pink spot at the bottom. There are a lot of us. We have a huge effect, and 75% of us live in cities. Cities are important. Trevor's told us about urban plants. We've talked about urban plants. A lot of people have talked about urban plants. And I urge you all to kind of look at the gardens, because one of the things the museum is trying to do is to create an urban nature movement with plants at the center. Plants are at the center of this. And this is also about collaborating with communities of people who are not botanists. And that's one of the important things about the guides to pavement plants, which Chris Dixon talked about. But inspiring the next generation is also incredibly important. And one of the things that we're doing through the museum is to work with the Department of the Environment and the RHS to do something called the National Education Nature Park. And this is to take every school in England, we have here, this is an old slide. This is a slide of which the nature park sites were 1,500. There are now more than 4,000 schools who are looking to increase biodiversity in their school grounds, in grasslands. And this is all about plants. It's all about plants. So inspiring that next generation really starts with plants. But there's more to collaboration than you think. It's much more complicated than just making groups together. And the BSBI strategy map is actually a really good way to think about collaboration, looking at loves of plants, skilled people, data management, and business models. Looking at all of those things to find a world where wild plants will actually thrive. Because that means we will have a green Earth in the future. That Earth will remain green. The plants will remain at the center. And it's a long road, but it's a road that requires us not only to act locally and think locally, but also to think globally and act globally and navigate those differences between those things in a way in which we come together to do something that will enable us to have a world where plants thrive. And we can all answer that question. Why botany and why now? And the answer is because it's the best. So thank you very much.